All right, before the break we were talking about punishment and our need to really use punishment judiciously. I'm almost through with that subject. I really don't want to dwell on punishment, but I do want to make one point before we move on, and that is, I think as adults we tend to think that punishment just automatically works. And one reason we think that is because teachers are oftentimes the type of person for whom punishment did work, which leads us to the often said remark that punishment only works on those who don't need it. Many of you were probably very conscientious students and reluctant to misbehave in school, and so you made every effort to do what you were supposed to do. The thought of getting sent to the office was just awful for you. And so you responded very well to punishment. And I think as teachers, we tend to think that worked for us and therefore it's going to work for children too. But it often doesn't work for children. And so I want to close our discussion on punishment by talking to you a little bit about what has to happen for punishment to really be effective. And there are some steps that have to take place in the child's mind if there's any opportunity at all for punishment to work. Never mind that it has lots of aversive side effects and it has is very situation specific, and there are other reasons it isn't very effective. But first of all, it has to have a sequence of events take place if it has any chance of working at all. And the first step is that the student has to experience displeasure. That's what punishment is. It has to produce a level of displeasure or discomfort of some sort. And a lot of the things that we think are unpleasant for a child in school may not in fact be. For example, we may think it's terrible to send a child to the office, but that child may really prefer to be in the office than in your classroom doing what he is required to do. So while you think being sent to the office may be very bad, it may not be so bad for him. It may be a better alternative for him, in which case he or she will not experience displeasure. So for punishment to work, the first thing that has to happen is that the child has to experience displeasure. Then the displeasure has to make him mad. He has to react to that displeasure in some way. And he has to be able to perceive that the source of the displeasure is himself rather than the person who is administering the punishment. Oftentimes, children don't really understand that the reason they're being punished is that they did something wrong, and that something wrong is this, and that's what got them in the mess they're in. What they conclude is that they don't like you very well because you are the source of displeasure. So if punishment is going to work, the child has to experience displeasure. It has to cause some anger in him, and he has to be able to perceive the cause of the displeasure as being something he did and direct his anger at himself and what he did rather than direct it at the source of the punishment or the punisher. So once he decides, gosh, I did this and it caused me to have this displeasure, I'm really mad at myself for doing it. I'm not mad at the person who's punishing me. I'm mad at myself for doing it, and I'm going to direct that anger toward making a better choice next time. I'm not going to blurt out the answer next time because that's the source of my displeasure. And then he needs to be able to follow through with that by refraining from misbehavior in the next when the next opportunity presents itself. If that whole cycle doesn't come around, punishment is not going to work. And often it gets stuck somewhere in between, with the child actually being angry at the person who punishes him rather than realizing the cause and effect relationship between what he did wrong and the predicament that he finds himself in. So it's important, I think, for you to understand that sequence of events and realize that if all of the elements are not in place, this punishment experience is not going to be an effective one. And even if it is effective, it carries with it many negative side effects like being situation specific or bound to the particular individual, so he knows not to talk out in your room anymore, but he may very well talk out in the next teacher's classroom. So I want you to think not necessarily about every single element of that cycle, but the fact that these things have to happen in order for punishment to be effective. Now, this sort of understanding is along the line of attribution theory also, and we know certain things about the attributions of children who are low achievers. When children, many times when children are low achievers, they attribute their lack of success to some very erroneous things. We relate to this as from a standpoint of locus of control, really, whether you believe you have internal control or external control. But a person who makes positive attributions, a student who makes positive attributions, is likely to say things like, gosh, I made a good grade. That was because I studied really hard, I worked really hard at this, and I studied the right things. And so the end result of that was I made a good grade. That's what a positive attribution is. A positive attribution for lack of success might be, gosh, I didn't do very well on that. I studied the wrong things. Next time I know that what she really likes is this, that, or the other, and I'm going to prepare for this test in a different way next time. So we can make positive attributions regardless of the outcome, whether we're successful or unsuccessful. But the notion of a positive attribution indicates that you are a person in some control and that you understand what it takes to be successful and know how to analyze an experience and attribute your success and failure to appropriate things. Children who have negative attributions really have no clear-cut understanding about why they do well or why they don't do well. Gamblers typically operate from a strong external locus of control. So people who buy lottery tickets as opposed to people who don't may have a more fatalistic attitude. If I'm lucky, I might hit the lottery. Whereas you have a feeling of being out of control with the lottery, saying, I have no control over that, I'm not going to do it. But children who have negative attributions tend to operate from a stronger negative external locus of control. They say, oh, I did real good on that test. Well, why do you think that was? Well, the teacher liked me. That might be a reason that they would attribute to their success. Or you would ask them, why do you think you did bad on that test? It was too hard. That might be the reason that they would attribute their lack of success. So one of the things that we try to work on with kids is this notion that there's a relation between efforting and success. And we try to change attributions to ones that are positive. The feeling that I'm empowered, and if I do these kinds of things, it will result in my being successful. I have never read in the professional literature any explanation for how attributions develop in children, except that we know low achievers have negative attributions and high achievers tend to have positive attributions. But I believe that these attributions that children have are formed when they are very, very young in school, and at a time when they do effort very diligently. They try as hard as they can in kindergarten and first grade, but they're unsuccessful, and so they really don't understand a relationship between efforting and success, because their experiences have taught them that even when they try their very hardest, they don't do very well and they're not successful. And so when suddenly something good happens and they do succeed, they don't have an explanation for that either. And so this is something we have to really work on with children to be able to turn their achievement patterns around. Another thing your book talks about is timeout, and I want to touch on that briefly because it could be that you are in a setting that has one form of timeout or another. Your book and all books in applied behavior analysis always frame timeout in terms of timeout from reinforcement as if it weren't punishment. But I want to ask you, the ultimate timeout from reinforcement in our society is the penitentiary. So I guess if you don't think time out is punishment, then you wouldn't mind going to Huntsville, or since we're all ladies today, I guess you wouldn't mind going to Goree. You know, and my estimation, punishment, time out is an extreme form of punishment. Anything that is restrictive would probably be very punishing to me. But I want you to think about that if you're in a setting, because we try to paint timeout as timeout from reinforcement in something much less punitive, I think, than in actuality it is. I don't think there's much for children that is more punitive than social isolation, which is really what all timeout is, some form of social isolation. There are several forms of timeout. Some are more obtrusive than others. Of course, the mildest form really involves ignoring a child for a certain period of time. And we have more exclusive timeouts with little children, like letting them sit at the edge of the group but not participate because they're not participating appropriately and whatever. And then, of course, in ultimate cases, we have complete social isolation or removal from the classroom environment. And certainly when this is the case, it's much more drastic. It needs to be monitored carefully. It must be part of a child's individualized educational plan. You can't just decide willy-nilly that you're going to put a child in timeout. And certainly some of the values of timeout involve the fact that you can disrupt a child's out-of-control behavior. If you remove him from that situation, you can provide him with some time to reflect on his behavior and sort of analyze what he might have done wrong so that he can see the relation between the source of his predicament, if you will, and the discomfort that he's feeling, way we talked about a minute ago with punishment. And then also it may give you an opportunity to provide him feedback about his behavior and give him some alternatives of the next time you're in this situation. You might try some of these things because they would work better for you than the behavior you chose this particular time. So if you're going to use timeout, try to make it as therapeutic a situation as you possibly can, rather than the notion of you've been naughty, so I'm putting you in jail type thing. I mean, that just vibrates with me in all the wrong ways. You may also, particularly if you're in HISD, be in a school where the behavior classroom has a level system. In this system, children who behave better and more and reach their objectives are eligible for increasingly more seductive reinforcers and reinforcers that they like better. So the ultimate end result of the level system is that the student returns to the regular classroom, and so this carries with it the notion that re-entering the regular classroom is a motivating factor, and I'm not sure that it always is with children. Sometimes kids really, particularly by the time they're in middle school, I think, they've either become affiliated with special ed, and this represents a place that is safe and secure for them, and they are comfortable there, and they're very threatened by the notion of going back into a mainstream environment. Or they find special ed stigmatizing, they hate it, and they'll do anything to get out. So for this latter child, the level system may be very effective. This may be a child who really wants to work his way back into a general ed classroom. but for other children, they find the safety and security of special ed very appealing, and so you have to make returning to the classroom then the contingent behavior rather than pretending that that's a reinforcer. You have to say to that child, okay, you've done this, 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 and this. Now, if you'll just go spend 30 minutes in the general ed classroom and be really good, then that becomes the operant behavior that is reinforced, rather than saying, oh, you've been so good, now you get to go to the briar patch, you know, as it were, because they may not perceive the general ed classroom as a positively motivating thing. Some other strategies your book talks about is the good behavior game. In this case, the teacher divides the class into 2 or more groups, and during instructional time she monitors the behavior of the 2 groups to see which group has the best behavior, and then the one group rewards the other. She rewards the good group or whatever. You can do any variation on the good behavior game that you want to. I think if you work with games and competitions and things in your classroom, you'll find that you get a much higher level of cooperation and your kids have more fun, particularly by the time they're in about the 3rd or 4th grade. When children come to school initially, they're very motivated to please the teacher. By the time they enter the upper grades of elementary school, they're very motivated to please their peers and to interact with their peers. And if you don't capitalize on that natural developmental level that children exhibit after the age of about 9 or 10, you're really missing a grand opportunity to utilize their developmental level to extract the pro-social and pro-academic behavior that you want to see. Your book talks a little bit about contracting, or the notion that you actually have a written arrangement with the child that says, if you will do this, these things, I will provide you with these things. This is particularly good if you have a child who argues about contingencies. If you say, okay, if you'll do 5 problems of math, you'll get 5 minutes of free time. And the child does 1 problem and brings his paper in and then argues with you about what the agreement was. With that child, a contract is good. I don't think it's necessary for all children, but contracting is certainly good if you have a child who has difficulty sticking with the arrangement that you had. Self-monitoring is a good thing. We talked a little bit before the break about charts and ways of monitoring children's behavior. Sometimes it's great for them to monitor how many math problems they completed successfully, or how many minutes they worked without getting off task, these kinds of things, and make them a little chart and monitor their own behavior. You can give them, particularly little kids love gold stars and this sort of thing, and they can take the chart home and show their parents what progress they've made. I think all of us like to see our progress. You know, if we're on a diet, we weigh every morning. If we're trying to quit smoking, we go count how many days we don't smoke. So all of us have systems for counting and measuring our successes, and sometimes this in and of itself can be a very motivating factor for children as well. So self-monitoring is a strategy you might want to use. This is along with self-instruction. You may teach children to give themselves self-directed statements that guide their social learning and social problem solving. Reminders to say, when you get mixed up, these are your steps. Go back to remind yourself, have I gone over my steps? One of the things we talk about in this chapter is generalization. There's very little in special education that's more important than generalization. The truth is, without generalization, the entire school curriculum is a waste of time. We may have talked about that before in here, but it's very important for you to remember, if children don't exhibit pro-social behaviors, pro-academic behaviors in authentic settings, then there's no point in them learning them. Going to school is not an end in and of itself. going to school is a venue for equipping children with response options for authentic settings. So if we teach children to fill out job applications, for example, and they never go out and fill out a job application, that's pointless. So generalization, or the notion that children acquire skills in school and then implement them in authentic settings, is essential. And we know, as I've mentioned to you before, that the failure to do so in special education can result in school being useless for this population. So make sure that you are encouraging children to experiment with pro-social skills, for example, on the playground and in Boy Scouts and in other settings. You may, particularly if you work with older children, be in the unfortunate position of having a confrontation with the student. The older I get, the less inclination I have to be a policeman in almost every area of my life. I think maybe as a younger person I sort of felt some sort of civil responsibility to make everybody toe the mark and walk the line, but the older I get, you know, the less inclined I am in that direction. And certainly when we have a confrontation with a child, there is a great potential there for a power struggle to develop. And when you get in a power struggle with a child, lots of different scenarios can unfold, but almost all of them are bad. When you get in a confrontation with a child, if it escalates to a power struggle, about the best thing that can happen is that you win the power struggle. Then how does the child feel about you? Very bad. Usually he doesn't like you very well. So you've lost. And that's the best thing that can happen in a power struggle, is that you win and he doesn't like you anymore. What if you lose? That's worse. So I'm not very inclined to get in a power struggle with children. And certainly I'm not inclined to get in a physical confrontation with children. I have done so with little children when I was pretty sure I could win. But I've never done so with older children where there was any question about that. I think with very young children, sometimes there's an element of security in knowing that somebody's in control and there's someone who's going to prevent them from doing things that they're concerned about doing. You know, we have this big issue now about gun control. And of course, when you're in a school setting, you will have to follow the policies of your school to the letter about what you do about threats of violence and that sort of thing. But my feeling is that sometimes we don't have policies that are very good in that respect. You know, a 6-year-old child says, I'm going to bring a gun to school and I'm going to shoot you. And maybe what he really wants is the assurance of your saying, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that. You're going to sit down now and finish your math. So maybe the child needs the feeling that someone is in control of the situation who's going to prevent him from doing things that he fears he might do. And I think sometimes we whisk them off to the office and call their parents and make a big scene. And the truth is that children begin to define themselves and get their attention from saying these kinds of things. So You will certainly have to follow your school policies, whatever they are. I would never encourage you not to do so because, for one thing, your job would be jeopardized. But I would encourage you to question alternative ways of helping formulate school policy so that we manage these kinds of things in ways that have the best possible outcome for children. And I think sometimes we can suffice it to say, that isn't appropriate and we don't talk like that in school. I hate you, I hate you. Well, I'm sure you feel that way right now, but we're going to sit down and do reading anyway. Might be better than sending him to the office and making a big issue of some of these things. But as a child gets older and more physically threatening, it's important for you to stay calm, to not become personally involved in a confrontation, not to say things that will be likely to make the situation escalate. And certainly, if you can't ignore the behavior, sometimes it's important to relocate and take the other people. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Well, you know, maybe so, but we're not going to sit around for the party, so everybody get up and let's go. It's much better to leave a room than it is to let an escalation or a confrontation get out of control. Your book talks about life space interviews. I'm not going to dwell on this very much. You can read the steps in a life space interview yourself. The life space interview technique is a technique that is put forth by the psychoeducational people, and it's really a communication technique for talking to children and relating with them around either a crisis situation that springs up out of nowhere or a recurrent problem behavior that they exhibit over time. And I do think it's worthwhile for you to take a look at what the book says about life space interviews, because truly I believe that communicating productively with kids about their behavior is one of the best ways that we can build a relationship for kids and help them in this regard. Your book also talks about a school-wide discipline system. It's very possible that when you begin working, you will be in a school that has a school-wide discipline program. And the good news about school-wide discipline programs is everybody's on the same page and everybody's doing the same thing, and the children know from one teacher in one setting in one classroom to the next what the rules are and what the consequences are for breaking the rules. And so there's a uniformity in that approach that gives it a great deal of consistency and is very beneficial to helping kids understand what's going on. But there are also, you know, some disadvantages in that they don't do much to address the individual needs of the student, and that they are almost always based on punishment. Years ago, I was in a school that had a school-wide discipline program, and it was each child had a clip, and the clip was on a line, and you know, if the child misbehaved, his clip was moved. So let's think about this for a minute. Of a discipline system that is really based on punishment, isn't it? Because what is recognized in this discipline system is when you do something wrong. So when you do something wrong, it's a behavior we want to see decrease, and the only way to decrease it is with punishment, right? So right off the bat, of course, we're a little bit worried about this moving clips. It also doesn't do anything for a child who's doing things right, does it? It only acknowledges the kids who are doing things wrong. It is a punishment rather than a reinforcement-driven system. So we know from a standpoint of empirical evidence that it's going to be less effective than a system driven by reinforcement. Let me ask you what you think would have happened if they had have just turned the line around. What would have happened if they had have had exactly that same system, but they would have said, for everybody who's good, we're going to move your clip forward. And what if you had little Billy over here who was being bad, and you said to him, Billy, get back to work. We want to be able to move your clip forward. Rather than, Billy, you're not working. Go move your clip. Do you see the difference? If you want to be an effective classroom, would you rather have your clip move forward or backward? Even at 20, you'd rather have your clip move forward. Everybody wants their clip moved forward. But our tendency in school is to, you go move your clip backward. When you are participating in a school-wide discipline program, have it be a program with positive rules that tells kids what to do and reinforces them for doing it. You will get 10 times better behavior from Billy if you say to him, Billy, get back to work. We want to move your clip forward. Don't you want to move your clip forward? Then you will say by saying, Billy, you're not working. Go move your clip backward and sit down and try again. Wouldn't that be more motivating to you? Doesn't that make sense? Well, not only does it make sense, but we have good empirical evidence to indicate that it is in fact true. We get a much higher level of behavior with reinforcement than we do with punishment. Your book talks about some school-wide discipline systems. One is assertive discipline. That's my least favorite. I think it's this 3 strikes and you're out is just such a negative kind of thing. I believe I could make it work if I had to, but I could make it work in spite of the program rather than because of it. Another program, and one that I consider to be much easier to implement and much more effective, is a system called Positive Behavioral Supports. And this system is really built on behavioral principles, but it structures social environments so that we're producing socially important outcomes and providing kids with the supports necessary to elicit behavior that we can reinforce. Your book talks about social skills training, and I think this is an important element. The social skills, we know that many children in special education don't acquire a sophisticated and acceptable set of social skills like children often do in the general ed classroom. You see a child in special ed, for example, who wants to get another child's attention, so he hits him with his book bag. You can tell by the way he hits him with his book bag that he's not trying to hurt him. He just wants to get that child's attention. But what happens? The other kid hates it. You know, he doesn't want to be hit. Even if it didn't hurt, the other kid didn't want to be hit. So rather than getting what he wants, the child gets rejected, which makes him try harder, but he doesn't know how. So one of the things we know is that oftentimes we have to teach children in special education appropriate social skills so that they understand how they need to behave to get the response that they want, because they don't figure this out vicariously and on their own. There are several programs available. They have a number of elements in common. Their purpose, of course, is to allow the child to initiate and maintain positive relationships with peers as well as adults, to gain peer acceptance and effect a classroom adjustment that puts them in a positive light and allows them to cope effectively in their social environments and affect the outcomes they want through coping rather than the outcomes that they don't want. Oftentimes, as it is now, the children behave in ways that get them outcomes that they don't want, and once again, they don't know what to attribute these outcomes to. They don't know why. There are several methods for assessing social skills. Your book talks about some of the methods. I'm not going to reiterate those, but I do want to talk to you briefly about some of the sociometric techniques that allow you to identify the children in your classroom who may be social isolates. You might ask your children, say if you're teaching in first grade, for example, you might ask your children, if you could invite two people over to stay the night with you, who would you invite? And of course, at this age, you would probably ask the boys separately from the girls because, you know, little boys and girls don't play together at that age. So you might take the little girls, and there might be 12 little girls in your classroom, and you might ask Jane and discover that Jane chooses Mary and she chooses Ellen. And then you ask Ellen and discover that Ellen chooses Mary and Ellen chooses Louise. And you ask Mary who she chooses, and she chooses Ellen, and she chooses Sue. Sue, on the other hand, chooses Ellen, and she chooses Louise. Well, eventually, as you develop this, you usually find clusters. There may be another cluster of kids over here who hang together, but you may find that no one chooses Jane. So in a period of time, you might do the same thing by asking children, if you had a birthday party, who would you like to invite? And you begin to see a pattern in which Jane is a social isolate. And this may be what you've observed from this child on the playground and so on and so forth. So you might want to take some interventions to hypothesize why Jane is not more socially acceptable to her peers, and how you might manipulate the environment so she's put in a more positive light, or teach her some response alternatives or some social skills that will make her more attractive and acceptable to her peers. But these kinds of things are important because the children are not likely to acquire these kinds of things on their own. Now then, your book talks about improving social skills and some techniques for that, beginning with modeling, which is the vicarious learning, looking at how someone else does it or demonstrating to someone else how to do it. Modeling is very important. A guy named Bandera has written volumes on modeling. He's a social learning theorist in the behaviorist camp, and has pointed out that nobody ever learns everything by trial and error, that we learn by watching other people and imitating what they do. So another word for modeling is imitation learning. And that when we look at somebody and we try to reproduce their behavior, we don't do it perfectly the first time. But we try and we get better and better. If you wait for a person to have a perfect response before you reinforce them, you'll never get there, right? For example, when we start little boys playing Little League, we want them all to pitch like Nolan Ryan, don't we? But none of them are going to. And so when they're 6, if they can just get it over the plate, that's pretty good, right? But of course, by the time they're 8, they have to pitch better than that, don't they, to be recognized. And by the time they're 10, they have to pitch better still. So they refine their techniques in a process that we call shaping. And shaping is really training successive approximations. This is an important concept for us in education because we know that there are many, many skills that children will not exhibit at the proficiency level in the beginning. They have to practice and get better and better. Handwriting is a good example of something we train by successive approximations. When you write your name in kindergarten, it's really good if the letters are recognizable, right? But by the time you get in the 2nd grade, you're expected to make a pretty perfect representation of the letters of the alphabet when you write your name. And we reinforce and encourage successively greater approximations of the target behavior we're looking for. Coaching is really using verbal cues oftentimes along with modeling and shaping to affect a better level of reinforcement. Usually we combine reinforcement with all of the social learning theories, whether we use modeling, shaping, coaching, or whatever. There's another technique called behavioral chains too, where you teach a little bit at a time. For example, if you were teaching a child to tie his shoe, you'd teach making a loop and reinforcing that, and then to get reinforcement he'd have to make a second loop, and so on and so forth. So there are these kinds of things, and there are curriculum programs available for this. And it's important when you select them to make sure that you have a program that includes the appropriate scope and sequence for what you want to teach. It offers pre and post tests to see if you're doing any good and has these kinds of things. And certainly any time we are working on social skills, we want to do on-the-spot training. If you're teaching somebody social skills about good manners, when good manners occur spontaneously in the cafeteria, we want to reinforce those. Generalization, your book points out some characteristics of generalization, such as making sure that students have mastered, first of all, the skills at a fluency level that they are supposed to generalize, that you make training as realistic as possible. In other words, if you're going to teach somebody to fill out a job application, use a real job application so that your training exemplars are as realistic as possible. Teach behaviors that will maximize their social success. We want normalized behaviors and behaviors that minimize failure. We want real life homework assignments that take these skills and use them in a different environment, and we want to enlist the help of those in a normalized environment to reinforce and elicit these skills. It's very important that we document the ability to train for generalization, because it's really the only way, as I mentioned earlier, of validating treatment. If we can't do that, if we can't prove that these skills are going to be used in an authentic setting, then they're really not very useful. So we're going to take a work break, and Kim's going to start. I really got through that last.
Our guided practice and the assignment this week for improving classroom behavior will be off of the CD-ROM found in your study guide that accompanied your textbook. So you will need the CD-ROM to look again at the guided practice and to complete the independent practice this week. You know that recurring nightmare that everybody has, that you show up at your job or school naked? Okay, everybody has that nightmare. Oh, you forgot to put your clothes on. When you start to teaching, you're going to have a different kind of nightmare. I had this nightmare for years, that I had a class that I could not control. Now, when you all are teachers and you start having that nightmare, you can come back to me and say, you're right, that really did happen. When children don't know how to wash their hands, we teach them. When they don't know how to say their alphabet, we teach them. When they don't know how to cross the street, we teach them. When they don't know how to divide fractions, we teach them. When they don't know how to spell, we teach them. Last night I had to do a lesson on inertia with my 5th grade daughter. I had to teach her about that. So what makes us think that when kids don't know how to behave, that they should already know that? We have to teach them not only classroom behaviors, but social behaviors. And I think that's really important for teachers to remember. Don't assume your children are coming to school knowing how to behave. Don't assume children who have special needs know the correct way to socially behave in your classroom. We have to teach them. I'm going to go rather quickly through this first part because it's really important we get to our vignettes today, because I know you all are going to really participate and tell me what you see in those vignettes that Dr. Goodman has talked about and what you read about in your text. A lot of these Dr. Goodman has already covered, so I'll kind of speed through these. We've already talked about in past classes about defining behavior and addressing behavior, so we have a positive classroom atmosphere. And this lesson is going to discuss how teachers can be proactive in establishing and maintaining a positive classroom environment that fosters that appropriate behavior that we're looking for. First of all, arrange your classroom to meet social emotional needs as well as instructional and organizational needs. When students walk into your classroom, have you set the tone for learning? Is it positive, nurturing? Is it an accepting atmosphere? Is it a welcoming atmosphere for all students, the general education students and those students with special needs? Adjust your schedule and provide a balance between highly structured periods of activity and more stimulating activities, and that will help your students' behavior also. Establish a group behavior management plan that incorporates individual needs. This especially goes with children with disabilities, and Dr. Goodman talked a lot about this. What needs are those students trying to meet with their behavior? Provide direct instruction, program learning, precision teaching lessons. This is just good teaching. You will have fewer behavior problems in your classroom when the students are engaged, they're interested, they're personally involved, when they're invested in that classroom and what you are doing. Provide group building opportunities that move students from that I orientation to that we orientation. I'm sure you've talked about this in your classes, about creating a community in your classroom. What affects me affects everybody because this classroom is a community. Okay? If a child is having trouble, it's all of our problems. What can we do to help that child? And that creates such a wonderful, positive atmosphere in your classroom where a child can feel safe and feel that they're accepted because the rest of the class wants to help out. Be aware of how individual needs affect group dynamics. Again, this goes back to our mistaken goals that Dr. Goodman was talking about. Why is that child behaving like that? Need for attention, power, nurturing, avoiding a task. Maybe it's task avoidance. Maybe it's revenge. So be aware of how that individual's needs are affecting the whole group behavior. Attend to students' physiological needs as well as their psychological needs. If your student, I especially had this when I taught in West Virginia, if your student hasn't eaten since lunch the day before when they got their free and reduced lunch, they're probably not going to do very well in your classroom and they're probably not going to behave the way you want them to behave. So keep that in mind for students. I once had a student who behavior was out of control. Found out the next week he was living in a car. No food, no way to get food, and the only food he got was a hot lunch every day at school. Okay? So make sure your students' needs are being met in other ways too when you're considering how to correct and help them behaviorally. You all are familiar with Maslow, right? That hierarchy. Much of acting out behavior reflects a need for power attention, as Dr. Goodman says. Attempt to give as little emotional response as possible to inappropriate behavior. Don't take it personally. I've been bit, kicked, head-butted, pushed downstairs, pinched, slapped, all of those things, more times than I would like to recall. You take it personally at first. It takes you aback, but you know you cannot take it personally. That student, it sometimes has nothing to do with you, especially students with special needs. And so show as little emotion. You have to be predictive. You have to, that student has to know what to expect from you when that behavior occurs. Effective behavior managers in the classroom, they respect their own strengths and weaknesses as seriously as those of their students. As teachers, you will find out when you start to teach what your own strengths and weaknesses are as far as handling classroom, everything in your classroom, okay? Know that if a student behaves in a certain way, that you feel that that is not your strength, how to effectively remediate that behavior. Look for some help. Ask someone. The student is behaving this way. I'm not sure what to do. Okay, this is a weakness of mine. How can I effectively treat that student in my room? Understand that social emotional growth is a never-ending process. Just because they're a junior in high school doesn't mean, okay, because you figure they've had 12 years of school, they should know how to behave. Never assume that. Okay, we don't know if you don't know that student's background, etc. Clearly communicate rules, goals, and expectations. So important from kindergarten all the way through college. The students need to know what's expected of them, what the rules are, what the classroom goals are, and that will help reduce unacceptable behavior in your classroom. Respond to behaviors consistently and predictably. Okay? Students want to know that if they do this, this is what will happen. If I do this, the teacher will praise me and I'll get to do this. But if you treat another student differently, their students will be confused. Well, he did that, and the teacher just talked to him. I did it, I got sent to the office. Okay? That will create confusion about what the consequences are for behaviors in your classroom. And exhibit a high degree of empathy and self-efficacy as a teacher. And I'm sure we all do that anyway. We are going to look at two vignettes. One is in a preschool classroom and one is in a 6th grade classroom. When you watch these, I want you to jot down, just real quick while you're watching them, what you observe the teacher doing. Observe what you see the teacher not doing. Sometimes that's just as important as what she's doing. What is she not doing in response to these students' behaviors? And then I want you also to observe while you're watching the classroom environment in general and how that teacher has been proactive in setting up her classroom, not only the physical environment, but the social and emotional environment, how she has set up that classroom so to minimize behavior problems in her classroom. Okay? It'll just take me a second to get it up here. Musical interlude. All right, let's watch the preschool one first. And before you watch this, I have one thing to say. Do we have preschool teachers in here? None? Well, if you have any friends that are preschool teachers, before you watch this, I have one thing to say. God bless preschool teachers. Oh, gosh. Okay, let's watch carefully. Remember, we're looking for what the teacher does, what the teacher doesn't do, and the classroom environment that she has set up. Did you jot some things down? From what Dr. Goodman has told us today and from your textbook, what did you see this teacher doing that is establishing an environment for appropriate behavior in her classroom? Either individually with this child or in general. Just one thing, anybody. Yes, ma'am.
She gave individual attention, just you know, helping him do whatever he need, whatever they were playing with. She gave the attention that he wanted or needed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This is obviously a child that needs some individual attention, needs some help in learning how to behave in that setting. What else? You look like you want to say something.
Oh, she got to the child's level and to talk to him straight to the eyes, not reprimand them or talk.
Excellent, excellent observation. Get down on your knees and see what it's like to have to look up at somebody when they're talking to you. Always come down to the child's level, especially as preschool, kindergarten, first grade teachers. Very good observation. What else did we observe? What kind of tone of voice did she use? Did we ever hear her say, "Get up in your seat"? Ooh, I'd be tempted. Did we ever hear her say that? No. She used a very pleasant tone of voice with the child, very quiet, very soothing. Okay. Did you hear her restate the procedures and the rules? She did that twice. At the beginning and when the child is playing with the Play-Doh, she restates the expectations. This is how we do it in our class. She's teaching that student how to behave in that atmosphere. What else? Anyone? Yes, ma'am.
She compliments the other girl's artwork about how good it is, but she says it was kind of hard to hear. But
it is. The audio is not great on these. You're right. She's also attending to other students while she's working with that student. Her presence is known, okay, with the other students. Just because she's working with one, the students know she's still there and watching what they're doing also. Very important. Okay. How about physically what she did with this child, this particular child?
She picked him up off the floor.
Mm-hmm. What else? She just pick him up and walk away and say, play with your Play-Doh?
No, she set him back on his seat, on his chair.
And then sat down. Sure, proximity, that physical proximity. She even did some hand over hand with him, showing him how to interact with his Play-Doh, what he was working on. So that physical proximity with that child, and it looks like he's going to need a lot more of that. She also fosters that independent success. He starts doing something, and she doesn't immediately go over and say, let me do this for you. Okay, she's fostering more independence in the child so he can feel successful. Did you see at the beginning where she takes the scissors away and walks over and shows him how to get the clay off and bring it to, no, we don't play with it on the floor. We bring it over to the table. And I have a feeling about 2 minutes after that, when he was done playing, what did she probably do? When he was done playing with the Play-Doh, what did she do? Someone's talking. Okay, go ahead.
Help him put it back in the shelf.
Sure, she keeps encouraging those classroom routines. Okay? Again, when children feel that they are safe in the classroom, they know what's expected, the classroom routine, this is what I do. Okay, they feel safe, and those behaviors that you don't want to see are going to be lessened. They're going to be fewer. Okay, let's look at a 6th grade classroom. Were there any more with that one? You caught a few very important ones. We're picking up this lesson from the 6th grade teacher at the independent practice section, where she has assigned these students in her 6th grade classroom to make a leaflet or a pamphlet about what mummies' tombs, pyramids. They're studying Egyptian history or history in the Egyptians. So they're making like a little leaflet about a mummy's tomb and the pyramid and things like that. So that's where we pick it up. And they started their independent practice, and she's going around to see how everybody is doing.
See what you would put in your tomb if you just put them on the outside this time. So before you tape it, make sure you do all the other things first. Okay? Be too difficult afterwards. Yes, label everything. Label the king's chamber, where the queen's chamber would be, the air shafts, okay, the underground, well, that's a nice sketch. Very nice, Matt. You may abbreviate it for me. Sure, that's fine. Because you're on your travel logs. Much better. Now the second, really, I like what you're doing, but if you're going to do a travel log, then it might be a good idea to just take your time and to draw some lines real lightly at first, so everything is nice and straight. Don't try to just get through it to be doing it real quick. Make sure anything you do is a reflection of yourself, and you want it to look perfect, so take your time, okay? This will be a good first draft. We'll just do it over, take your time, okay? So finish up this last sentence, drawing. I'm happy to see a lot of effort and really creative ideas too.
Okay. What did we see? There's 2 behaviors that this teacher had to address in her classroom as she's walking around and they're doing their independent practice. Can someone comment on one of them? Maybe the boy with the magazine and what she did?
I don't know. What I don't think the teacher did right in there, because she took more time when the student that was doing the right work she was like, you need to do it like this, you need to do it like that, you need to do it more perfect in here, make more lines in here. She took more time for when the student that was doing the right work than when the student that wasn't doing anything. The student was just looking at the magazine. She just touch it like this and put the magazine inside, and she keeps going. So she did not took the time to explain the boy, you need to do it like this, you need to do it like that. She just keep on going. So he wasn't doing the work. Maybe he did not understand what to do.
Do you think maybe that's a good observation? Do you think maybe that teacher knew that little boy and knew what he was capable of?
Yeah, but she was assuming. She's most of the teachers assume that, oh, he's supposed to do this, he's supposed to do that. She took more time when the student that was doing everything right than when the student that wasn't doing anything.
So you feel she should have addressed the off-task behavior more?
She was supposed to address the boy when the magazine, look, you need to do this, you need to do like that, blah, blah, explain it again what to do. But instead, she just took the magazine, asked him to put the magazine away and keep going. He wasn't doing anything in there, but the girl that was doing everything, she took the time, do it like this, do it like that, you need more perfection in here, you need more perfection here, more there. So it's like,
The way that she did address the off-task behavior, though, okay? I had an algebra teacher once that would have sat in his chair and thrown an eraser at the kid, okay? The way she did address that behavior, though, I think was appropriate in that, did she say anything? No? What did she do? Proximity, little hand on the shoulder. You see the kid look up at her? Uh-oh, I've been discovered. Okay? I have a feeling, I know what you're saying, but I have a feeling she knew that little boy knew what he was supposed to be doing. If you know your students in your classroom, she probably knows he's very capable of doing what the assignment is, and instead chose to read that magazine. I understand your point, though. I understand your point. What about the little girl? Anyone have a comment about how she handled that? The little girl that had gotten kind of off on the wrong foot, and obviously her work was not going to be up to par. How did she handle that? Someone tell me. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll get you in a minute, Lee. Go ahead. Okay, Lee, go ahead.
She started by encouraging her with what she had done right before going on and giving her some instruction, which I thought was really good, so that the child didn't automatically get a negative feedback right away.
I thought how she handled that was a good model for all teachers, okay? Very positive redirection, saying, I like what you've done, but let's think about, you are such a good student, and I know you can do this so much better. Let's have this be your rough draft, and then you can work from this and do a great final draft. I thought that was a very positive way to handle, and saying, what is this? What a mess. Oh, what kind of work do you think you're going to get from that little girl next time? Okay, yes, ma'am.
I know that's good, but it didn't sound natural. I don't know. It just, I don't know. It just...
You thought the teacher sounded unnatural? Like when the principal comes to evaluate you and you put on your little dog and pony show? Well, maybe. Also, what about the classroom environment? Sixth graders. What do you think of sixth graders sitting in groups like that? You think she set it up so it was good for her classroom? Obviously, unless they were all performing for the video camera that was going, they were on task, okay? She made positive comments while she was walking around, okay? So everyone felt like they were doing a good job. It's conducive to the peer collaboration and group work. So obviously that worked for her, instead of, desks in a row and everybody working, not being able to see anybody. Okay. Any other comments on that? Let me see if we covered everything. She made her presence known. Have you ever had a teacher, you're working, and she's sitting up here at the desk, or he's sitting up at the desk? Okay. She made her presence known during that whole assignment. She walked around, she commented, I like what you're doing, and that seems common sense. Okay. But I think teachers get so busy, they think, oh, I'm going to steal this 15 minutes to sit down and grade these 15 papers, where you really need to make your presence known in the classroom, and that will lessen behavior problems. If students know you're watching and you're interested and you're engaged, etc. See. I think we got them all there. Okay. Any other comments on the vignettes. For your assignment, you'll be looking at the rest of the vignettes on, you can't see that anymore, but you will notice when you're watching the little vignettes, at the bottom it has tabs that you can click on. They say things like experts, literature, teacher, and students. And if you'll read those comments underneath, it will kind of show you, he's kind of showing you there, like there's the expert one. When you click on experts, it'll show you what the experts say about what is happening in that vignette. It'll show what the literature says about what's happening in that vignette. It will show what the teacher had to say about what she was thinking and doing. And those really give you a lot of insight into what's going on in the classroom in those vignettes. So you can see there, if I click on literature, it goes over to what the literature says about what's happening in the vignettes. Okay? Any questions? What we did today for this guided practice is exactly what you'll do in your assignment, watching the vignettes and bringing some insight or reflecting upon what you're seeing, okay? And then using that to create some of your own ideas for behavior management in your classroom. Okay? Good luck. Thanks.